Hello, my name is Jessie Stevens, and I am presenting on the cognitive characteristics of gifted children. The first thing we need to do is identify what cognitive ability means. And cognitive ability is less about specific content knowledge and more about the general intelligence needed to survive. We use our cognitive ability to complete simple tasks as well as to learn and complete more difficult, arduous tasks. Cognitive ability is our natural born intelligence, how we learn to how we learn, how we problem solve, how we pay attention, all of those things. Building upon general cognitive ability is cognitive giftedness, and this is superior cognitive ability. This may not be specific content knowledge or academic achievement, but really just overall exceptional intelligence. I think about characters like the Sheldon Cooper from Big Bang Theory. Cognitively gifted children are generally identified based on their IQ. So it's looked at as above 125 is considered superior intelligence. And these are students who are identified as having not only superior intelligence, but superior aptitude as well. The idea of cognitive giftedness, this innate intelligence, is seen as early as the early 1900s from Alfred Binet, the originator of the mental age concept. He's also one of the people behind the Binet-Simon intelligence test. And he wrote about school children who were naturally gifted, who were naturally intelligent, so much so that they didn't really benefit from age appropriate education. These were children who needed to be accelerated, who needed more arduous and difficult education. Benet is an interesting guy. I got really kind of rabbit holed into some information on him. So while he is one of the originators of an intelligence test, he also knew that intelligence couldn't be measured by a singular test, that there's no one set standard for intelligence. Like a lot of educators today, Benet knew that intelligence was way too broad a concept to be identified by a single number. So he did understand that intelligence wasn't something you could just like weigh and measure. But he did say that there were people who just from birth, from early childhood, exhibited superior intelligence and superior abilities. So it was interesting to see Benet recognize both of these things, that you could not necessarily measure somebody's intelligence, but that there are people just who are born with more intelligence. So, cognitively gifted children, those children who are born with an innate superior intelligence, often have a wider vocabulary. They have a really sharp memory for small details, for things that maybe seem inconsequential, they lock in on. And they have an interest in mentally rigorous activities. These children have early expression, both verbally and in their reading ability. They identify skills very early on. They tend to be very critical, elaborate thinkers. These are our planners. They are natural problem solvers, and they are intrinsically motivated. And I think that final detail is really important in understanding cognitively gifted children. They are not going to be motivated, or they're less likely to be motivated by physical rewards. There's something innately inside them that pushes them, that motivates them. Cognitively gifted children may be a bit more emotionally and physically sensitive, and we'll come back to that in a few slides. They also tend to be a little bit more impulsive, partly because they're so curious. They're determined. They have perseverance and a high sense of focus. Those attributes can cause them to feel easily frustrated. So, cognitively gifted children might show all of these characteristics. They might show one or two of them. Like Binet said, there's no one set scale for intelligence. But generally speaking, a cognitively gifted child is going to have an interest in problem solving. Like I said, they're an early reader with a large vocabulary. They are curious and they absorb information at an astounding rate. They have diverse interests, diverse abilities. They tend to be independent, persistent, critical thinkers. I thought it was interesting that the website I found this from mentioned they tend to be very skeptical and self critical. Again, because they are very, very deep thinkers. They like flexible ways of thinking. They enjoy having goal building. They are often building goals for themselves and for others. They're constantly evaluating themselves and evaluating others, generally because they're looking for ways to improve a skill or a trait or a circumstance. So, cognitively gifted children in the classroom really benefit from gifted programming where they are given work that is to their level. Okay, so not necessarily age specific work, but work that will challenge them intellectually. Gifted programming, like pull out programming, summer programs, after school activities, work really well for cognitively gifted children because they get more one on one time with the teacher. They get work that is tailor made for them, and they get to work with their peers who are often very intelligent and motivated as well. Cognitively gifted children can see the whole picture of like if you're teaching them on a concept, they want to see the end goal. They want to see where you're going. That can be kind of frustrating in a whole like general ed classroom because you're trying to teach the skills and they want to know where we're going in the future. Cognitively gifted children understand very, very complicated details. They come to that understanding very quickly. They need very little repetition to master a task. This, again, can be challenging for us in a general ed classroom because we have to make sure everybody understands. We have to make sure that everybody has the skills before we can move the whole class on. So, again, gifted programming allows for our cognitively gifted children to excel and to feel challenged in ways that really benefit them. So, cognitively gifted children in the classroom, a little bit more here. These are students who can make very abstract, very clever connections in school. They're often leading their classmates into greater or different understandings of a topic. These are children who respond positively to this kind of mental stimulation. They enjoy that mental problem solving. Like a lot of gifted students, though, cognitively gifted students sometimes feel a bit out of place in the general ed classroom. For our cognitively gifted students, it's because they are often thinking so far ahead of where the general classroom is. So while working with cognitively intelligent children is absolutely enriching and challenging for us, there are a few social and emotional things that teachers need to be aware of for specifically cognitively gifted students. Cognitively gifted students might struggle a bit more with bothering or intrusive thoughts. They might feel a bit more stress or negative excitement. Again, because they are thinking big picture, whole picture, they're thinking end goal, it's easy for them to kind of get lost in their thoughts when they're not being academically or intellectually challenged. They tend to feel a bit shy or uncomfortable in groups because they're not always understood by their peers. They may be liked by their peers, but they may also feel a disconnect. They just don't quite communicate in the way their peers do. Cognitively gifted children, again, because they have such innate intelligence, they see cause and effect much more clearly than many other students do. They tend to worry more about possible accidents. They tend to worry more about the what ifs in the world. And they ask those questions regularly in class. Well, what if this happens? And as a teacher, sometimes you're like, why are you worried about that? Where did that come from? For our cognitively gifted children, they can't help but think about those what ifs. That's part of the problem solving. They do have a tendency to have increased phobias, especially in crowded places. Again, I think this goes back to that very deep, very critical thinking. And they tend to have heightened senses, which, of course, I think heightened senses would feed back into that excitement, sense of fear, or being easily frustrated. If you're mentally stimulated, mentally overwhelmed, and then sensory overwhelmed, it would be easy to get kind of overly excited or overly emotional. This chart I thought was quite interesting. This is from another website about the intellectually gifted. And these you'll see here on the left side are traits of the gifted student that we tend to think about as being extremely positive, like they have a great sense of humor. But also, this website went ahead to extrapolate how that positive trait may manifest negatively in the general ed classroom. This is helpful for us to know because I'm sure we've all encountered a child where you're like, dang, they are so smart. Why are they doing this? Why are they behaving this way? What is going on with this kid? I know they know better. I know they're smarter than that. This chart may help us better understand why our intellectually gifted students are acting out. So I thought it was interesting to see that kids with a very keen, maybe even adult sense of humor tend to become the class clown for attention, or they'll use their humor for critical attacks. And at the secondary level, I certainly see that kids who use sarcasm in a very biting and aggressive way, not because they're trying to hurt someone, but because they know that it's going to get them attention. Intellectually gifted students have an intensity to them that can be really fascinating to watch, especially as they're problem solving something. But that intensity can also lead to frustration for them. And that intensity, while can be very challenging and engaging, can also lead to intense feelings and energy. They do have this storehouse of almost unusual amounts of information in their head, but that can lead to them getting easily bored. They know all this. They understand this already. And the rote memorization or repeated practice for them, they've gone way past that already. They do tend to get impatient with the perceived slowness of others. That sometimes can feed us back into that very first thing about the sense of humor. I've seen it in my classroom again at the upper level, where a student who has mastered a skill, a student who already understands the concept, gets frustrated that we're still talking about it and may kind of use some sarcasm with the classmates who aren't at their level yet. This is a negative trait. This is a negative behavior that we have to think about and we have to intervene with. So again, these might not be exhibited in your classroom. You may have encountered some of them. I know I personally have, and I thought this was an interesting way to see this. So how do we support our cognitively gifted children? What do we do for a child who's mastered a skill so quickly? Maybe you've planned for something to take 3 or 4 lessons and they've got it on lesson 1 and you're like, oh my. Okay, so what do we do now? What are ways we can help these children to not get bored, to not act out, to not feel a sense of frustration? The immediate tendency is to give them more work. And I was in a teacher conference recently with my elder daughter's preschool teacher. Georgia Kate is 4.5. She'll be going to kindergarten in the fall. And her preschool teacher said, my biggest concern with her in kindergarten is just getting more work, not necessarily the right kind of work. So gifted children, especially cognitively superior, not superior, that's the wrong word. Cognitively intelligent children don't need more work, they need the right work. They need work of increased difficulty and interest to help them stay engaged. So for me, next year, it's not so much about making sure she has enough work to do, this is my own child, but making sure that her work is at a level that's going to keep her interest, that's going to keep her academic energy up. So some things to think about in our general ed classroom if you have cognitively gifted children. Cognitively gifted children can excel in our classes, okay? It's not that they aren't capable of that. There are some things that, like, we could do some pre-testing to identify what students already know. That way you're not reteaching something that they're already comfortable with. Decreasing the frequency of large group activities and using smaller, flexible groups. Inviting more collaboration. I saw something recently about the role of mentorship in the gifted classroom that I thought was quite interesting. And mentorship doesn't have to be just like outside community people or teachers. It can be other students. So pairing children up with somebody who, can maybe counsel them or guide them. I've done a little bit of work with I teach seniors and sophomores. A little bit of work with that, like putting one of my seniors in touch with one of my sophomores when I notice they have a shared interest, or maybe need a little encouragement. So that could be something that would be helpful. Using a variety of teaching methods, which of course I know we are already doing: inductive, deductive reasoning strategies, hands on kind of concepts. Using more flexible pacing, creating projects that vary in abstractness, differentiating homework assignments, and allowing for more open ended questioning and assignments. These are some strategies I pulled from a website called Soaring with Snyder and Jane McCauley. So, things that were suggested on these sources are things like anchor activities. So, these are activities that can be completed independently, that are still all kind of tied to the same concept, but allow for different investigations or allow for different skills to be exhibited. Building interest centers and activity menus. I use in my classroom, I use tic-tac-toe boards quite frequently, both at the AP level and with my 10th grade gifted students. So recently, my AP seniors finished The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. And I knew that I had 6 or 7 activities that I wanted to present them, but I didn't want everybody to have to do it all. So I made a tic-tac-toe board, and when I laid out my activities, I had 9 squares on the board. And when I laid that out, I made sure that each way you went, and this took a little bit of time, but each way you went had a creative activity, had something to deal with vocabulary, and something to do with writing. Okay, not necessarily creative writing, but more like analytical writing. So what that did was it allowed students to figure out what they wanted to do, but I still got the material covered that I needed covered. And that was they really enjoyed that, responded really well to that. You can do some more curriculum compacting. So this allows curriculum to be adjusted or skipped based on prior knowledge. That's where that pre-testing is really important. Offering the most difficult thing first, I thought was really, really interesting. And this is part of compacting curriculum. Have students try the hardest task first. And if they are successful, they can throw away the rest. So allow students to try the hardest math question on the worksheet. And if they've got that, then have them do the next 4 or 5 that are deemed hardest. And if they get those, they don't have to do the rest of the worksheet. I thought that was a great strategy. In my classroom, again, I'm literature. Maybe I have them do, like, let's say we're doing a multiple choice practice for AP literature. I give them a passage. There are 10 questions. What if I highlight the 5 hardest questions? Because on the College Board, on AP exams, there's always this variety of questions. There's going to be 2 or 3 on each passage that are deemed most difficult, and then medium difficulty, and then what the College Board calls easier. Pardon me. If I have them start with the hardest questions and they get those, maybe I have them do one of the medium and skip the easier. Again, this is a way to compact the curriculum so they don't feel like they are having to repeat things that they already know. Independent study, love me some independent study in my classroom. I do independent novel studies. I do a memoir project that's independent. I am this year playing more with book clubs, which is still an independent activity, but it's done digitally. So a group of students read the same book, and then everything they do is done on like discussion boards and very much this like online class format. Learning centers, again, could be helpful. And then other extension activities. Textbooks often suggest extension activities for students. These are open-ended, real-world problems that are good ways to extend student learning. And these might be helpful if you have a student who finishes very quickly, finishes early. These extension activities might be of interest to them. Pardon me. I already mentioned mentorship, which could be helpful. Completing a learning log. So we know that our gifted students, especially our cognitively gifted students, have outside hobbies and experiences, interests that tend to be very unique and very niche, if you will. So what if you're allowing the students to bring those outside interests in? They may be something that no one else in the classroom has an interest in, but if they can see the connection, and our cognitively gifted children will see connections where we may not immediately see them. pardon me, we could let them do a learning log where the student completes this log of their experiences, of things they've read or things they've learned, and how it connects to whatever it is you're doing in the classroom. I think this could be really interesting because we're probably going to see connections or learn connections that we wouldn't have seen otherwise, right? So I often will be talking about an element of literature, and I'll have a student say like, "Well, it's like da 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 da," and they'll bring up an example, and I'm like, "I have absolutely no clue where you're going with that." But once they explain it, I'm like, "Okay, I see it, I get it, I understand." Supporting this tendency to make these abstract connections can be really, really helpful for our gifted students. Allowing for specialized grading criteria, rewarding academic risk taking, providing opportunities for really divergent and convergent thinking. So maybe offering them an opportunity where like there's a right answer for this question, but not necessarily for this one. And I try to do that on my quizzes where I may have a multiple choice question that has a right answer, but I'm going to follow it up with a short answer question where there isn't one right answer. They get to explain what they think. Couple of questions that might be worth thinking about when you're designing your classroom, when you know you're going to have cognitively gifted students. Cognitively gifted students will respond extremely well to a teacher in a learning environment where the following things are asked. Can the student move around the room? With COVID, that's a challenge. But we do tend to see students who are cognitively gifted struggling with, I just lost my words, struggling a little bit with the tendency to fidget, especially when they're bored, especially when they're feeling frustrated. I, this year, set up a fidget box in my classroom. And again, y'all, I teach 10th and 12th grade, where there are a variety of fidget toys. They can get them, they can borrow them, they can play with them through class. I disinfect them every day. That's been really helpful. I've also set up a puzzle station in my room. So if we're having a discussion and somebody's needing to move, they can get up and they can go to the puzzle table as long as they're still engaged and involved in the classroom, trying to allow them that flexibility. Is humor and creativity appreciated in the classroom? Is the atmosphere welcoming? Is discovery encouraged? Students who feel that they are allowed to use their sense of humor, use their abstract thinking, are going to feel much more connected to the teacher, are going to be much more willing to engage in conversation and dynamic learning. Is the teacher committed to differentiation? And that's a really tough question because differentiation can be challenging. Differentiation isn't just making sure every child has a different kind of assignment, but it's making sure that every child has the right kind of assignment. And again, it goes back to me thinking about my daughter going into kindergarten next year and what that's going to mean for her. And I've been guilty of that, y'all, where I've just made sure that students had different assignments based on where they were at, but not really thinking about whether those are the right assignments. So that's something that we have to think about. Are assignments, and is the teacher curious? Are they enthusiastic? Are they willing to let control go? And y'all, that's tough. That's tough, right? Turning it over to the kids, letting students lead conversations, letting them lead discovery in the classroom. But we do have to allow them that. And then finally, do gifted students have opportunities to work with others like them, even across grades? And this is where at the elementary level, those pull-out programs are really beneficial. We don't see them as much at the middle school and the high school level, so that's where mentorship could be really, really helpful. So my advice when we think about our cognitively gifted students is to be as flexible as possible. Negotiate assignments, allow students to produce varied responses, encourage advocacy, encourage them to work ahead, encourage them to make those connections, to use their humor, just really to say yes to them as often as possible. And that's where I'm at in my classroom. I have incredibly brilliant students this year. I have in my AP senior classes, I have two of them. I have all of the top 10 of the senior class, and there are 400 seniors in our senior class. Like my fifth period is absolutely brilliant, like blow me out of the water every single day. So when they ask, can we do this? If I can let them do it, yeah, let's do that. And they recently, instead of each making their own PowerPoint about about symbolism in a novel, they're like, well, can we do a shared collaborative PowerPoint? Yes, let's do that. So allowing students that creativity, allowing them that advocacy, allowing them that control in the classroom is really the best way, I think, honestly, to support all of our students, but especially our cognitively gifted students. I've got my references here. There are quite a few that were really helpful for me, especially the Amy Asam one, the Janine McCauley one. So these might be helpful. Thank you for listening. I'm so sorry for all of my coughing. My family is recovering from COVID, and it's been kind of a challenging week. So I hope you have a blessed day. Thank you very much.